Right, yes, perfect. So, in the previous video, again, we went over the flow training plan foundation. Now, in the first video, we went over that filtering process foundation. So, how we create a filtering process training plan. Now, that is exactly what can lead you to create, for example, Delirium. So, to go over Delirium right here, Delirium is my main trading plan. It's what I use the most and what I am currently, I would argue, the most comfortable with as well. I really like this trading plan. This is my main trading strategy that I always use. So in every video, YouTube video, you see that I take a trade, or any video that I take a trade, if of course, that is likely going to be the Delirium trading plan that I'm using. So first things first, what do we need to understand in a Delirium trading plan? Well, the first thing we see right there is psychology. We see a psychology tab right there. By the way, this Notion is at the top of this video. If you click on the button, you can navigate towards the Notion as well. You can duplicate it, whatever you want to do with it. Then if we click on that and we open it, the first two questions, or the first two things right there that we have is, are you in a good state of mind, and reflect? All right. Well, let's first move on before we get back to that. Then the next bullet point that we have, the analyst right there, is where we need to go over the top-down analysis. So in the analyst phase, we go over top-down analysis, the foundational levels, the drawn liquidity, the narrative, and the context, which basically is your bias, narrative, and that context, right? Then we also have a question, if we are going higher, where are we going higher from? Then that concludes the analyst phase. Then we have the execution phase. The highest probability pair, the interest list, because that is the one we want to be trading. Then we have the entry, and then we move on to the risk management again. So what have we done here? We have basically summed up all the steps that we need to take in order to actually get to a trade ID right there, and in order to fully be able as well to have the guidelines in our trading ID. Because of course, to get to a trade ID, we basically stop at entry. After we take an entry, that's the trading ID done. But now we need to have the guidelines as well to stick to our risk management. How do we go about our risk management, etc.? That is very important. Now, these are, of course, the general guidelines. But after that, we dive more deeper into that. And that is when we go into the trading plan. Before we do that, we need to understand that the MMP, the money making pyramid, is designed in such a way that you always start off with psychology. So before you do anything in your trading, before you dive into any charts, you start off with your psychology. And again, that doesn't need to be a 30-minute meditation session. Doesn't need to be, I need to first go into an ice bath, need to first do this, need to first do that. No. Can be a simple 5 minutes check on yourself. How am I feeling? Am I feeling ill? Am I feeling sick? Those are also important questions for your psychology. Am I feeling sick? Am I feeling ill? All right. Am I in a fresh, good state of mind? Perfect. Can I move on to analyst phase? Yes, you are now allowed to move on to the analyst phase. Because again, everything starts and ends with psychology. So we first need to have that psychology check. Real quick check. Doesn't have to be crazy. Doesn't have to be a crazy checklist. Just a simple question like, how are you feeling? Can be enough to trigger those thoughts again, to say, well, how am I actually feeling? Well, I slept pretty good. I'm pretty confident in my abilities right now. Yeah, I feel great. Perfect. Move on to the analyst phase. If that question then arises where you would argue, all right, well, I didn't sleep really good. I feel a little bit sick. I have a sore throat as well. Maybe I'm getting a bit sick. Well, maybe that will also, well, not maybe, that will definitely also affect your psychology. So what do we want to do? Well, maybe you want to take a step back today and don't trade and spare that energy that you might have right now, that little bit of energy. Let's take that into the next day if we were feeling better. So that is the step as well that you're seeing at the top of the Notion right there. The first step is always psychology. Then we have analyst, and then we have execution. And that cycle repeats. So after that, you start back at psychology again. That is the foundation of Delirium as well, where psychology, analyst, execution. We start back at psychology. Psychology, analyst, execution. Start back at psychology. Constantly. Now, for the actual trading plan, psychology is what we start off with, what we mentioned. Are you in a good state of mind? So what do we actually mean by that? Let's digest that a little bit more, dissect that a little bit more. is there something that happened yesterday that you need to be aware of? For example, did you take a loss yesterday? Did you take a trade yesterday? Or did you not take a trade yesterday? Again, the taking a trade yesterday does not necessarily mean that if you took a trade, you now need to stop trading. No. Because as well, if you did not take a trade, you might have the urge to more so force an ID. Because if yesterday was Tuesday and today is Wednesday and you felt the need or you felt like there was going to be an opportunity on Tuesday, then you might go into Wednesday now with a very forceful thought. We're thinking, I might need to force an ID right here. Well, of course, you're not literally thinking that, but your actions show that. They reflect that thought process where you're now forcing an ID. So, is there something that happened yesterday that you need to be aware of? And that, again, is, did you take a loss? Did you take a win? Did you take a break even? Did you take a trade in general? Did you not take a trade in general? How are you feeling after that day? So how are you feeling? Did you go to bed very annoyed that you didn't take any trades? Did you go to bed very annoyed because you took a loss? Did you go to bed overconfident, overjoyed because you took a winner? All things we need to be aware of right there. And once we're aware of that, that's enough for now. Because at the end, when we reflect again, that is very beneficial to know how we actually felt. So, are you feeling ill? And this is a question I like to ask a lot because, well, I don't go out to random people to ask it, don't get me wrong. But when I start trading, I like to see, how is my body feeling? Did I sleep well? If I didn't sleep well, I don't want to trade. Even if the opportunities are great and I might be missing out, I simply don't want to trade. The lack of sleep leads to impulsive trading. The lack of sleep in general leads to impulsive thoughts, impulsive actions. And when I have a lack of sleep, I'm just not 100% there. I am just not there. And as well, what I notice when I have a lack of sleep, I get more so negative thoughts. The thoughts, I can't control them fully anymore. So I always want to optimize my sleep. And when I slept good or I slept all right, perfect. I can go into my trading day. But if I know for a fact that I only slept 4 hours, I slept really bad, I simply don't want to trade. And I don't want to move on to the analyst. It's better again. And it leads me back to the story where you always want to focus on one thing at a time with your full attention. So nowadays that's quite hard, where if you are studying, you might still grab your phone out to look at some Instagram. When you're talking to someone, you might scroll through some TikToks and message another friend. It's always our goal to focus on one task the best we can with full focus. So if that means we are resting, then we are truly resting. And we can't half-ass it. And with half-assing it, I mean that if we sleep for 4 hours and then try to trade, and then we're both half-assing the sleeping and we're half-assing the trading. So that's not going to work. We need to fully sleep good first before we can actually look to trade. So if you didn't sleep well, then I would advise, if you can, go back to sleep and then we can start the day again. We need to first finish the first step with full attention, full focus, even if that's sleeping, that needs our full focus at that moment to then move on to the next task. Again, if you watch the foundational enrollment, this is the foundational levels that we're talking about. If you are not in a good state of mind because your diet is not good, if you are not sleeping well, then trading is also not going to do well. And the way I always like to compare that is we are top athletes here. Trading is the most difficult profession that you can pursue. So how can we not take care of our health? And, well, how can we oblivious to the fact that that doesn't translate into our trading? Of course it translates into our trading, how we are feeling, how our body is feeling. It's very important to have our psychology in check right there. So, with the questions, of course, is there something that happened yesterday that you need to be aware of? And then, are you feeling ill? So, how are you feeling? All right, so if we are in a good state of mind, we can move on to the analyst right there. If we are not, then we don't move on. So, analyst right there, top-down analysis. What do we actually do in our top-down analysis? Well, of course, in the top-down analysis video, we went over this as well, more in depth. Basically summed up, what we are doing is we are looking for a bias, so a direction, mainly told through fair value gaps, Then we are looking at that narrative. How are we getting there? Then we have that context. And then the last one is, which pair has the clearest answers to these questions? Because that creates the interest list. That is the filtering process, right? Now, it's very important to understand that I do not have a checklist of, all right, now check your closed PD arrays, now check the fair value gaps. Check this to the left, check this to the right. Because simply said, we are not going to follow through on that. As in, if you have an extremely long checklist with all kinds of things that you need to do, then from my experience and from what I see in other students as well, we are simply not going to do that because it's simply too long. We don't want to read a book before we start trading. We just want to start trading. So to start trading, we still need to understand a few guidelines, of course, but over time you will remember those guidelines. As in bias, you already need to know ahead of getting into your trading day what is bias. I don't need to know that reminder. Oh yeah, bias, what was that actually? Well, let me first go back to Arjo's video. Let me then watch it again to then get into my trading day. Well, if that is the case, then you're simply not ready to trade. That's very easily said. You're simply not ready to trade if you don't know the definition of bias. If you don't know the definition of narrative, you're simply not ready to trade. If you don't know the definition of context, which is again that boundary and the target, you're simply not ready to trade. So in that case, if that is the case, that's not crazy. As in, there's nothing to be ashamed of. But in that case, what we do want to do, we want to take a step back. We don't want to live trade just yet. We first want to have, all right, what is bias? When I wake you up in the middle of the night, I promise I won't do that. But you might hear my voice in your mind, in your dreams while you're sleeping. What is bias? What is bias? What is bias? You need to be able to wake up and answer to me, what is bias? What is narrative? What is boundary? And immediately give those definitions right there. So if you don't know the definitions just yet, then again, please write them down. And the definitions, why we need those definitions is because if we understand the bias is the direction and it's actually the drawn liquidity. So the PD array that we are looking to target, the bullish bias, bullish direction is we are looking to target a premium array. Well, that already clears up so much if we just are able to define things. The narrative is how are we getting there? So which discount array is going to be the cost to push into the drawn liquidity, into a premium array? The context is the area that we actually are trading. So the context is the boundary, which the boundary is the same as the narrative. But the boundary right there is where we can now go into our entry pattern to look for number 4 foundation level, our target, which the target is what we didn't have established just yet, because that is the context target. The context target is the first premium rate, the first discount rate that we actually encounter. So that is how you define things. And that is what we need to do first before we can move on to actually executing a certain pair. So we first need to understand these things right there. Very important. And then the reason why also you don't need to incorporate, or you don't need to say, all right, here you need to use candle signs, here you need to use this, because that will come natural. If you understand the definitions of those things, that will come natural. You just need to remind yourself first, all right, which concepts are we using before you even get to trading day, right? You already need to know. It's already ingrained into your mind. I don't need to go into defining right now, all right, for my candle signs, I'm going to use that in my bias and narrative mainly. All right, well, for my order flow, I'm going to use that in bias, narrative, a little bit of boundary as well. I don't need to define it. I already know it. It comes natural. And that is the state that we need to be in. It comes natural right there. So before we get into a trading plan, before we get into trading, we first need to understand where do we use the concept, which we've gone over already. What are the definitions of those foundation levels? Very important. We need to understand that. So then the last question, which we mentioned, was which pair has the clearest answers to those questions? So which pair has the clearest bias? Which pair has the clearest narrative? Which pair has the clearest context? What are the arguments right there? Then from that, we can understand, all right, if this has a very clear bias, but not so clear narrative, I don't want to trade it. It's not super high probability. The high probability pair could be, all right, but what is the bias? Very clear. Is the narrative clear? Yes. Is the context clear? Yes, extremely. High probability, let's trade it. And then, if they all have the same thing, so they all have clear bias, narrative, and context, well, then it's paying attention to the small little details. Which one is stronger? Which one is weaker? Those are things that come over time as well, which we're going to touch on as well in the finishing touch. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to understand execution. So what do we actually do in execution? Well, right here, we first have the highest probability pair. So the highest probability pair that we are going to trade. This is where the filtering process creates the interest list. How this again goes into action is exactly what we're going to show you as well. And to fully understand that thought process again. Now, then we have the entry. We need to understand the entries for Delirium because we are trading a filtering process trading plan right here, not a flow trading plan. So Delirium is not made for a flow trading plan. It's purely designed to analyze analyze multiple pairs and then focus on trading one multiple pair. So right there, you have monthly PD rate, 4-hour ST plus RE, or a daily ST. That is your ideal entry for your Delirium trading plan. Now, this is where it's also, well, let me actually first finish this. Weekly PD rate, 1-hour ST plus RE, or a 4-hour ST, daily PD rate, 15-minute ST plus RE, or a 1-hour ST. 4-hour PD rate, 5-minute ST plus RE, or 15-minute ST. These are the time frames, and these are, again, a minimum. And what I mean with a minimum is you can have a 4-hour PD rate, and you can require a 15-minute ST, because that's the minimum. You can also go for a 15-minute ST plus RE, because that's more than a 15-minute ST, right? So that's perfectly fine to trade. So a 5-minute ST plus RE, so 2 REs right there, of a 4-hour PD rate, it's also perfectly fine. You can never go below these time frames or below these confirmations. So a daily PD rate, no, you will never be using a 15-minute ST alone. So a 4-hour PD rate, you are never going to be using a 5-minute ST off of that alone. So it's also important to understand, I have not included 1-hour PD rate, 5-minute ST, 1-minute ST plus RE. No, because you would not do that in the Delirium trading plan. In Delirium trading plan, the minimum entry is a 5-minute ST plus RE. That's the lowest you can go, which means you're using a 4-hour PD rate most likely. If you want to use a 1-hour PD rate to go into the 5-minute ST plus RE, you can do that. But I would not advise that. I would just stick to these guidelines right here. Where again, why is it 4-hour ST plus RE or daily ST? Well, in the monthly PD rate and 4-hour ST plus RE or daily ST, it's also the question, what type of trader do you want to be? Because by now, I think you have a great idea. Do I want to be a flow trader or a filtering process plan trader? All right. If I want to be a filtering process trading plan trader, then likely you're already willing to more so take higher time frame entries. You're likely already referring more so to 1-hour, 15-minute entries, where if you're a flow trader, you definitely want to be on the 5-minute and the 1-minute, most likely. That's in the general speaking. Now, generally speaking, not the general speaking, then if we understand that, all right, which time frames do we actually want to enter on? Because me personally, I don't want to take 4-hour entries. So for my 4-hour entries, or that would be entries, in my 4-hour ST plus RE, I want to confirm that in the 5-minute ST plus RE. So I'm again using that guideline to then reconfirm it again. Where in a daily ST of the monthly PD rate, I do not want to enter off the daily ST. I will go into that daily ST to then look for my 15-minute ST plus RE. So that is again how I go about that. Where the weekly PD rate, you'll see a lot that I don't necessarily enter 1-hour ST plus RE because I simply don't really want to swing trade. I don't really feel like swing trading. And that's not really in my, I can do that, but it's not really in my personal preference right now. So that is where I refer to more so the 4-hour ST. And off of that 4-hour ST, I then go again into the 5-minute ST plus RE. So I'm confirming that again. But again, there's also a limit because I do not go into a 1-hour ST to then go into the 1-minute ST plus RE. I do not go into the 15-minute ST to then go into the 1-minute ST. That's not for the filtering process and that's not for Delirium right there. So that's quite important to understand as well. Where here what you're seeing, yes, all these time frames, you are allowed to get creative. So if you want to use a 1-hour ST and a 5-minute ST plus RE, you're allowed to do that. But don't get too crazy with it right here. Just stick to these simple guidelines right there. Where it's also the case, that the way I currently define my Delirium timeframes is if I'm trading monthly PD rate, then it's 4-hour ST plus re, and then off of that, a 5-minute ST plus re. Or 4-hour ST in the right conditions as well, 5-minute ST plus re off of that right there. Perfectly fine for me to enter off of. Then, daily ST is for me a 15-minute ST plus re. Weekly PD rate is for me a 4-hour ST. Of that 4-hour ST, I want to trade a 5-minute ST plus re. Then, the daily PD rate is for me a 15-minute ST plus re. You also see me sometimes trading off of a 1-hour ST. Really depends on the time I have on my hands right there. That's where I'm more experienced as well, which I would advise you pick one. So you choose one, where I most of the time stick to the 15-minute ST plus re. Then the 4-hour PD rate for me is also 5-minute ST plus re. That is how I go about my time frames right there. But if you prefer a 15-minute ST, if you prefer always trading off a 1-hour ST, then you can do that, of course. But that is how I go about it. That is for the entries. Now, for the risk management, what do we have? Well, first of all, we have a risk percentage depending on your account. What does that mean? What does that look like? If you are starting on a fresh and a brand new account, and let's say we're starting on a 10K account, so 10,000 euro, US dollar, whatever you want it to be, then we want to start off with building a buffer. So we start off with building up to 1% risk, as in 1% buffer. What does that look like? Let's say, going to write it down below it right here. We have 10,000 and we are trading a 10,000 account. Now, we want to use at first 0.5% risk. So that is 50 US dollar, 50 euros what we want to use. Then from that trade right there, we ideally look to win that trade. And when we win that trade, well, of course, that is always the goal. Then we are in 1% profit. From that 1% profit, you can now use 2 times 1% risk. So what does that look like? If we lose the trade, we can again use, after that losing trade, risk 1% again. If we win the trade, we just keep on risking 1%. Then, if we lose the trade and we also lose the next trade, that means we are now 1% in drawdown. Right there. If that is the case, everything below the original position, so everything below the original balance, that is where we are risking 0.5%. So, from 10,000 until 4% drawdown is where you are risking 0.5%, unless you have those 2 trades. What I mean by that is you have a 2-trade rule. You always want to focus on using the same amount of risk for 2 trades in a row. The reason that is because we're using a 1 to 2 RR. And, well, that is what I'm using for Delirium mainly. And when I'm using a 1 to 2 RR, if I switch between risk, 1%, then back to 0 to 5%, then back to 1%, then back and forth, then there is a chance we are going to be stuck in a break-even cycle. And not necessarily because we are break-even traders or we are just, not profitable in that sense. It's because our risk management does not allow us to be profitable. So that's what we need to be aware of, that we're not stuck in a break-even cycle. So to prevent that, if you are upping your risk, so you are using a different risk percentage than you were using before, you always want to use that risk percentage twice in a row. So, for example, we start off with 0.5%. That's the only time you would not use 0.5% twice in a row, unless you lose the first trade. Then after that, if you win the trade from 0 to 5%, so then you have 1% profit. From that 1% profit right there, we now can upscale the risk percentage. The risk percentage now goes to 1%. When you risk 1% right there, that means the risk has changed. Because when we start out with 0 to 5%, the risk doesn't change, right? But when we then scale to 1%, the risk changes. So when the risk changes, you want to make sure that you have 2 trades in a row of that risk percentage that you just changed to. And this is again when we are looking to upscale our risk constantly. So eventually, when we want to go to 2% risk, we also want to do the same thing, which means that we can potentially look at losing 4%, of course. So we need to take that into account, where we can't just go into after the first 1% trade and we think, well, let's take a 2% trade right here, and then think, oh, but yeah, let's take another 2%. No, that's playing with your money right there. Is not what I would want to do, and be professional about that as well. Where if we then take that 1% trade, after that 0 to 5%, we win. We take the 1% trade, and after that, we win that trade. Then again, we want to risk again 1%, where we now made 3% first. If we win that trade again, we have 5%. Depending on your account. If that's a funded account, if that's a funded challenge, if that's a personal account, it's a little bit different. But if that's a funded account, and if that's a challenge, keep on risking 1%. If you're waiting for a payout right there, then 5% is an insane amount for your first payout. That's a really good amount. Even after 2%, I would say, all right, let's stop trading on that fund account. Let's first get the refund of our challenge fee. Let's first get that payout before we start doing more risk on a funded account. It's very important. Again, it's what we'll go over in the funded guide. Now, right there, that is important to understand, is to understand that 2-trade rule right there. Now, what we mentioned is if we're in minus 1%, so we are below the original balance of the account, which is 10%. Everything below that, you are looking to risk 0.5%. So 0.5% until when? Until you are back at that 1%, or until you're back at that 10,000 as well. So ideally that 1%, because then again, you have that buffer to work with. And when you have that buffer to work with, that's quite nice, of course, because then you don't have to worry about going back into drawdown again, possibly. That's quite nice. Now, you also risk 0.5% until we reach 4% drawdown. So meaning minus 4%. Once we reach minus 4%, that is when we now look to go to 0.25%. 0.25% right there to actually climb back out of drawdown. And at 0.5%, you risk it until you are back above minus 4%. So you can look back to get to 0.5% risk again, making sure you take 2 trades in a row right there. And then 0.5% until you are back at, again, that original balance, ideally that 1%. So what does that look like again? Everything above 10K is where you risk ideally 1%. Then everything 10K and below. So 10K and 9,600 right there, 9.6K. That is where you risk 0.5% right there. Then everything below 9.6K is where you look to trade 0.25% risk. These are the general rule of thumbs. Understanding again that if we upscale our risk, we want to use 2 trades of the same risk amount right there. That's very important. So that is how you would go about your risk percentage depending on your account. Now, of course, I use 10K here, but if you're 100K, even if you're on a million account right there, it's the exact same thing. So that would be the 10K to the 9.6K is just the 0% to the 4% drawdown. So the minus 4% right there, where this is above 0% and this would be the minus 4% sitting right there. That is how you would go about it. So that is your risk percentage. That is how I personally go about my risk percentage as well. Once you get more advanced and once you get more experience, the risk percentages can change. This is just as well starting out right here. Where the risk percentage for me, I can also change it depending on the probability. So for example, in December, in August, I already lower my risk automatically. So I already dropped my risk to 0.5%. And with even going into 0.25% in, for example, this December price, actually currently, I drop it to 0.25%, where I always need to weigh in, or I need to balance things out, because is it worth it to then trade 0.25%, or is it just better to save some brain points and just wait? Well, in some conditions, I think it's just better to wait. So I just simply wait and I don't trade. So that is very important, that eventually over time, you can look to increase your risk percentage. You can look to decrease your risk percentage as well based on the probabilities. This is only if you are in profit. Because if you are not in profit and you are in drawdown, then you are just simply also in an emotional state. So we can't fully trust your thought process, if that makes sense. Because the reason it's like you need to be put on a lie detector almost, where it's because we are on drawdown, we are more emotional because we don't like being in drawdown. So if we then say, all right, well, I think these conditions are really high probability, so let me now risk 2% to get out of drawdown. Yes, that's not what we want to do. So again, we always want to drop in risk when we are in drawdown because we do not want to blow the account. That's very important. Over time again, and this is again where full experience comes in, but also it really depends on your financial situation. Where, for example, you'll see people on social media say, yes, you want to increase your risk in funded accounts and you want to have a lot of risk, etc. And I do agree with that to a level where funded accounts, they don't reflect the same thing as in a personal account. It's completely different. Investors capital is as well completely different to actually trade. And that's because funded, you are working with a lot of restrictions. So you can't go into crazy drawdown, which also means that you can allow yourself to risk more, just seeing it as sort of, all right, let me pass this fast to then move on to the next account. Yes, that could be a great option once you have more experience, and also mainly when you have the financial support. Because if you do not have those financials to support that ID, then of course that is futile. Then we don't want to blow that account. We want to be careful with it and first get to a payout, first get to that refund of the challenge fee, to then potentially, after maybe if we have 200k account and we now want to take another 50k account, then we can potentially look to increase our risk in general in a funded challenge. But first we start off with just the slow progress right there, the slow process. Unless you're in a great financial condition where you can allow yourself to risk a lot more, perfectly fine, go for it. Who am I to tell you that you can't risk your own money right there? But we need to understand that does require, again, that great financial situation that you need to be in, of course. So that is very important in the risk percentage, where, again, the high probability conditions that we mentioned, if you want to increase the risk based on the conditions, you need to be in profit. So above the original balance, above it. Very important. All right, then off of the risk percentage, we now know what we are going to risk in a certain trade. Then after that, we need to know our stop loss, of course, before we actually go into the trade as well. We need to know our stop loss. And our stop loss is the lot in context. Now, what does that look like? Again, all things we're going to go over, all things we've already gone over as well. The lot in context is if we are entering off a 15-minute re, then the lot of that re, of that 15-minute order flow leg, if there is, let's say that's a bullish order flow leg on the 15-minute, then below that lot, is there a 1 hour for value gap? Then again, we need to take that 1 hour for value gap into account, right? All things we've gone over. Then the take profit for now, I have 1 to 2 RR right there. Quite simple, quite easy, perfect. 1 to 2 RR, very nice. Then break even. So when do we go break even? Well, once there is no reason to return. So what we went over in the break even, the risk management video itself as well, and execution week, that is exactly how we want to look to go break even. So overall, the risk management is quite the same, or it's well, you could argue almost the same on every single trading plan. The only thing that changes is, again, the things before that, where the risk management on the different trading plans stays quite similar. Then after that risk management, we have psychology. Because after that, after the last step, we either take a loss, a win, or a break even. Perfect. So then we have our psychology right there. This comes after the risk management immediately, where now we need to reflect. What is reflecting? Stop trading and see what happened. And seeing what happened is right there, is analyzing as well and asking yourself the question, how do you feel after this trade? Did you stick to the plan? So it's on an emotional level, and it's also understanding on a technical level. Did we actually stick to the plan? If no, all right, that's something we need to work on, of course. If yes, and it's a loss, for example, and we did stick to the plan, is there something that we can see that might indicate that it could have been low probability? If yes, we note it down, but we don't beat ourselves up over it. And the reason why that is very important as well to understand is sometimes you will just take losses. So the question is it's a very dangerous question with a very thin line. And I get the question very often, where the question is something like, all right, why did it do this? Why did I take the loss? How could I prevent this loss? How can I do this? How can I see that the market is wanting to do this? Sometimes you're just going to take a loss. And again, every concept that we're using, everything that we're using here is just probabilities. I'm not preaching and saying everything here works 100% of the time. No, otherwise I probably wouldn't be teaching, right? I would be a millionaire somewhere in, I don't know, in Dubai or wherever you want to be. So again, when someone finds a 100% strategy that works 100% of the time, then, well, tell me please. And that person is likely full of bullshit as well. So that's very important to understand, that every single thing, every strategy in the world, every trading strategy in the world, every trading concept in the world is all based on probabilities. It's nothing special. Yes, the logic might make you more comfortable, but it's all based on probabilities. So understanding that also leads you to then understanding, all right, if I lose a trade, I don't need to go crazy about why did I lose a trade? Maybe I need to incorporate now 90-minute cycles. Maybe I need to incorporate this other concept. It's probabilities. You just haven't accepted that you might also take a loss. You're going to take a loss. Well, that I hope that's not surprising to you, because you are going to take a loss. I'm also going to take a loss. In 2024, I am going to take losing trades. Crazy. Does that prevent me now from not trading? No, because I know the winners, if I do my 2024 correctly, the winners will be more than the losses. Perfect. So I want to trade. I want to take that risk. So the question as in, what did I do wrong in this trade on a technical analysis basis, is a thin line. Don't get too crazy with that. Yes, you can potentially look at some, if you're just starting out, at seeing, all right, why could this have been low probability? If we understand that, perfect, we can move on. But don't look to incorporate anything else. That's very, very important, of course. Remember the house rules. Then, as well, on an emotional level, how did you actually feel about the trade? Were you very anxious? Did you micromanage it? Did you do something with your stop loss, with your take profit? Were you hesitant to get in the trade, which maybe led you to then entering the trade very late or even very early? So those are all things that we need to reflect on first, before we are then allowed to move to psychology again. Are you in a good state of mind? Then asking the same questions right there. Is there something we need to be aware of that already happened? Then we go back to analyst. Then we go back to execution. So that is very important to understand first. Again, that we have those psychology checklists. It's almost like you're going through the customs. If you're in the airport, you first need to, when you go into the airport, go through customs. When you come out of the airport, likely, of course, depending on where you fly to, but you need to, again, go through the customs. So you have those double checks right there. And in the middle, you are looking to, well, in the airplane, I hope you just stay in the airplane, don't do anything crazy. But in the middle of our trading plan, we go into analyst and execution right there. So that is very important to understand. So this is Delirium basically summed up right there. Of course, the concepts that we use are incorporated already into the foundational levels that we use. So our entry, our top-down analysis, etc. And the psychology is also what we went over in Psychology Week. But I'm not going to name them all right there, because that is not a trading plan. A trading plan does not consist of having all the concepts named, having 1,000 checklists. No, it's very easy. It's very easy checklist to go over. That's what we need to have. So if we look at this in the works, and I want to use the same example that we used before on Euro US dollar, because that's one example that we have been using throughout this enrollment month as well. Where on Euro US dollar, of course, we are looking, or we have been looking to continue higher off of that daily fair value gap right there. Perfect. So overall, how did we get to this? Let's fully dissect it again. We start off with, before we even dive into the chart, are you in a good state of mind? Let's see. Is there something that happened yesterday that you need to be aware of? I didn't take any trades, but I also wasn't really actively looking at any trades, so I didn't have that idea of I'm missing out. Absolutely not. So other than that, I'm feeling perfectly fine. Are you feeling ill? No, I slept pretty good. I feel pretty good. Mentally, I'm good. I'm ready. All right, let's go to the analyst phase. So analyst phase, what do we see? Top-down analysis, bias. So what is our bias here? Well, our bias is, again, understanding first definitions. Those definitions need to be ingrained. They need to be in your mind all the time. Bias, all right, the direction, the drawn liquidity. First, we need to understand the direction. Overall here on the daily, I can see we've been bullish. Let's actually take a look at the monthly to get a bigger overview. On the monthly, we had this monthly value gap, which we are not respecting right now. So that would say to me, well, we might want to continue higher. So where do we continue higher from? All right, let's also look at the drawn liquidity. Drawn liquidity, the closest PD raise that we can look to target, which on the weekly is that swing high. Do we have any narrative or do we have any understanding on how we can get there? Well, that's what we're currently going to look at. So the direction is bullish right now. Quite simple how we get to that direction overall. Again, practice, 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 practice. Then the second step is narrative. So how are we getting towards this drawn liquidity sitting right there? All right, on the daily, what do? Daily sitting right there. Daily fair value gap right there, which we can continue higher from. So currently, I'm not going over a filtering process. That is where the forecasts also come in. But currently, if we were to look at this, and well, I took a trade right there. So that moment in time, it was exactly when I thought bias extremely clear, narrative extremely clear, context extremely clear, because the context right now is this boundary in form of the daily value gap and that high. So in that context area sitting right there, that is where we now want to get involved on our 15-minute time frame. So this, to me, at that moment in time, was at the top of my interest list. And the reason being for that is because the bias, the narrative, and the boundary was just extremely clear. So that was very important. And then again, the fourth question in our top-down analysis, which pair has the clearest answers to these questions? At that moment in time, it was Euro US dollar. So that is exactly what we wanted to trade. Now, at that moment in time, of course, I was looking at it like this, like that. So I did not know if it wanted to deliver into the daily value gap just yet before it wanted to continue higher, etc. So then we move on to execution. I have everything ready right there. And now I'm moving on to execution. Highest probability pair. Filtering process creates the interest list. This would be at the top of our interest list right there. Again, that filtering process is something we go over in forecast videos. So don't worry. You will understand the filtering process and you will see that over and over and over and over again. So don't worry about that one. But the filtering process creates the interest list. This is at the top of my interest list. So I know the pair that I want to trade. I wake up right now and I see, are we still in the same exact spot as that we were last night before I actually analyzed it? Yes. Perfect. So it's still high probability. It's still on my interest list right there at the top. I don't need to analyze anything else. I want to stick to this pair right here. All right. Then next, entry. What do we see? Monthly PD ray, 4 hour ST plus RE, daily ST. Okay, interesting. Weekly PD ray, 1 hour ST. What is relevant for us? Daily PD ray, 15-minute ST plus RE. Nice. That is the one I'm taking. And again, before you get into a trade and before you get into a trading ID, you already know if you want to enter on the float, if you want to enter on the odd. Before you get into a trading ID as well, you already know if you want to enter right there of the 15-minute ST plus RE or if you want to enter of the 1 hour ST. That's the first guidelines that we need to have. It's very important. So the entry right there, 15-minute ST plus RE. Perfect. So do we have news supporting that ID? Of course, that is as a general rule of thumb. We always need news supporting the ID right there. Did not fully incorporate it into trading plan, more so the price right there, but we always need to have that news agreeing to the ID. So do we have news supporting the ID, trading that next day? Yes, we did at that moment in time. Perfect. Then 15-minute, we also need that kill zone to agree, right? It's already incorporated overall into our entry because that is what we always need to have. So please don't forget that as well. It's very important to have that time and price agreeing right there. Then right there, we sting into it. Perfect. So we can go into the lower time frame right now to look for our 15-minute ST plus RE. And once we had a sting into it was at that moment in time. That's when the London session happens. We know the target. We know what we need to wait for. 15-minute ST plus RE right now. We know time is supporting the ID right now. Perfect. London is currently opening. So what do we need to do? Well, we already have an ST. So the ST again is already there. We just need to wait for a new fair value gap, a new order flow leg, ideally in London. Perfect. Then right there, we create that fair value gap in London. All right, nice. So off of that float sitting right there is the entry covering the lot right there, which leads us to the risk management. Risk percentage, depending on your account, that's of course not something we can go over right now. Would be depending, let's say we are in 1% profit, or let's actually say we just lost a 1% trade and we were in 1% profit. Then again, what do? We want to have 2 trades in a row with that same amount of risk percentage. So what do? We want to risk 1% again. Perfect. Then 1% on this trade. Stop loss, lot in context, right there. Is that lot in context though? Well, then we need to ask ourselves in this area right there. So the area we have sting into the PD ray right there, and the area below the lot. Is there a 1 hour fair value gap? No. All right, perfect. So this indeed is in context right there. That lot is in context. So we can cover that lot. All right, take profit 1 to 2 RR right there. Perfect. Break even once there's no reason to return. Again, that is again where we have that 80% mechanical rule, 20% intuition and experience rule as well. Because here we can already tell there's no real reason to return right there before we reach the draw on liquidity. So after we create that fair value gap, of course, and our take profit was, for example, a little bit higher, then there's definitely no reason to return anymore right there. That's very important to understand. So break even once there's no reason to return. Perfect. What do we do right now? We can take a screenshot of this, and we can also, well, what we need to do next step is reflect. Stop trading and see what happened. All right, we took a trade, it was a winner right there. How do you feel after this trade? Again, I'm currently going to say something, but we just used the replay tool. The replay tool is where there are no emotions involved. So at that moment in time, how I was feeling at that moment in time, I quite remember it, is I was feeling all right. And yeah, I was feeling all right. I stuck to the trading plan as well. So overall, nothing crazy on my side. Then after that fact, I also moved on to the 1 hour, where I now took a 1 hour ST trade eventually. But again, that is because I already have that more experience. If you just are starting out and you haven't reached any profitability just yet, then let's stick to that 1 trade a day rule right there. Very important to understand as well. So this is the Delirium trading plan. And a lot of examples we have gone over throughout this enrolled month are Delirium trading plan entries. Now, if you want to use this trading plan, you can do that, of course. You can also use this as an inspiration to potentially change it a little bit here and there. I would advise, if you have not reached profitability just yet, or well, you're still looking, you're still on that journey, then if you want to use a trading plan, try using a trading plan like this instead of now trying to create your own whole trading plan, because usually that defeats the purpose of it. And what I mean by that is then usually what I see is that people then create a trading plan with all the downfalls that we went over, where it's now a whole checklist. We have to do all these things. We incorporate other things from other mentorships, from other mentors. It's not something we want to do, right? So I would advise to first, like we said in the philosophy video, blatantly copy first, and then afterwards you will see through your own experience, you are adding your own sauce to it. You're adding your own ingredients to the mix, which might make it a little bit better for your taste buds, which might, for your personal preference, you like it more. That is very important. That first blatantly copy, then afterwards, after a long period of time, you can add in your own things through experience only. Only through experience. Not by someone else telling you, hey, look into this, look into this. No. Every concept that you are going to be learning, everything that you are going to be adding into this trading plan, eventually, after you already seen profitability with it, is going to be through your own experience. And it's going to be added through to your own experience as well. It's not by watching a YouTube video and someone telling you, hey, look into this right now. No, it's added through your own experience or through the mentor that you are listening to. That is very important to understand, of course. So this is the Delirium trading plan, which again, we can get very creative with this. Because if we now want to only focus on one setup a week, for example, that can also be done. Where if we're too busy with work or something, then we would refer to a one-shot, one-kill training plan, which is also a video that we are going to go over. Now, for the next video, we are going to go over a flow training plan. What would that look like, etc. All right, perfect. Thank you.